Hey, Adam. How's it going?
David, good, man. We're back here for another episode of the podcast. Excited. We got an exciting guest with us today as well.
That's right. Well, before we get into it, let's start with quickly our mission. Welcome everyone to the RevOps Recruiters podcast, where our mission is to provide insights and best practices around finding, hiring, and retaining top revenue operations talent.
Yep, and that's David, Adam from RevSearch. So who do we have with us today?
I am excited to have Drew Bernstein on the podcast. So we've worked with Drew Bernstein. He's an excellent operator. He brings tons of experience, close to a decade of operations experience in different areas, different arenas. Growth stage companies. He's been on the consulting side. He's worked to support PE companies. He's now working as a value creation leader on the RevOps side, supporting Portco growth. Drew Bernstein, we're excited to have you on. Give us a little bit more color on your background.
Yeah, excited to be on it. And thanks for having me, guys. So I've been with LLR for the last 2 years, overseeing their revenue operations practice as part of our go-to-market value creation team. But I've been in this value creation space for the better part of the last 10 years. Had the opportunity to work with a handful of really special portfolio companies. Also have experience from a consulting side of the business. Then I think one of the things that have been a real value to me in my career journey is just also having that experience as an operator and developing those revenue operations functions. So excited to be here today and looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Yeah, man, we're so happy to have you. So looking forward to it as well. David, kick us off. What are we going to cover in kind of what do we want to get into today with Drew?
Yeah, why don't we start with the role of the RevOps leader within this context that we're talking about. We all know this role is critical, right? Folks want to know more about this role. So why don't we start there? In what ways is being a RevOps leader in a PE-backed company unique?
Yeah, I think first off, just the availability and the intention of having the position in the first place. It was kind of my introduction into revenue operations was learning about it from a value creation team initiative. And I think it's something that I've seen at a handful of different private equity firms. Post acquisition, one of the first roles that we see consistently be added to the roster is that revenue operations leader. And it's just such an important function, not only for the portfolio company, but to protect the investment from the deal team. So it's an important role for the portfolio company to really spearhead their growth. And I think from a value creation team and from the private equity perspective, we really see that as a liaison, as a catalyst to really drive a lot of those intended best practices. To really help accelerate the growth and also protect the investment that these private equity firms are making.
Yeah. We were having the conversation a few weeks back, Drew, talking about the podcast. One of the things we said was being a RevOps leader inside of a PE environment can look different than maybe some of the other organizations that aren't PE backed, right? Because you've got the side of the organization really understanding the numbers around things that are important KPIs for the business. But then the P also has some specific things that they're very interested in, right? And they're looking at. And so you talked about a few of these things that might be a little bit different between those two roles. Unpack that a little bit for us. What is specifically the PE firm looking for when they look at a really talented RevOps leader? How are they helping them in being a good balance between the leadership at the Portco and the leadership at the PE firm?
Yeah, I think it ultimately comes down to two things. One is to be able, you're working with large data sets. There's a lot of things happening, a lot of motions. Like, how do you get that all into a digestible format that can be easily interpreted? That everyone's kind of speaking the same language throughout the year, and there's just really an overall alignment, happening. So I think that's one area that we consistently look for in the revenue operations leaders we have within our portfolio. Is can they take that information and translate it into an actionable insight, in a very digestible way. The second piece is I would really say around the proactiveness. When you are working inside of a private equity-backed company, and again, I learned this from being an operator in a private equity-backed company, is they're looking at things in a different way. They want to track the selling efficiencies. They want to track how you're doing towards budget, towards plan, how everyone's doing towards the quota plan. And I think where I see a lot of the difference when it's not a private equity backed companies, they're just fine reporting out the numbers and showing the trends. But I think when you're owned by a private equity firm, they really want to see how you're doing against those defined targets, because a really strong revenue operations leader, you're trying to make this predictable sales engine. And I think when you can start to take those digestible data, the data points and make them digestible, and then also be proactive in your ability to make decisions off of those insights, that's where we see, really strong results. And I would say that strong performing RevOps person tends to translate into a really strong go-to-market function.
No, that's really good. So we've got expectations, obviously, from the PE side, right? Private equity firms looking for certain things, and then enter the RevOps leader, and here we go. How do we do this? And what sort of skills are required to get this lift done, get it to a place of baseline where, everybody's tracking, right? I think that's the critical thing in this relationship. Everybody needs to be on the same page. Let's dive into a little bit of that. What do you see? Now we have and I know we're aligned on this, by the way, skills around RevOps, right? But I'd love to hear from your side, what are some of those key strengths and skills that you see in those RevOps leaders, and specifically the ones that are in PE-backed portcos?
Yeah, and if you guys have probably been on the RevSearch website, you'll see kind of my testimonial, and I think you guys have to do a really strong job of being able to find talent that bring this to the table. But to me, it's having that business IQ is, to me, it's table stakes. Like, you can't have a successful revenue operations leader if they don't have that business IQ, because you're having conversations consistently with C-suites, with board members, with individual sellers, they're talking directly to us on the value creation team. We're talking to their deal team counterparts. So to be able to really understand, what are the revenue levers, what are the risks, why are we looking at the business this way? To me, like, if you don't have that business IQ, it's going to be hard to really drive the change that you want to see. Um, the second is it's an ability to work collaboratively, and I think it's something that gets way too overlooked, because so often in the companies that we work with, it's a 1, 2, maybe 3-person revenue operations team. So it's like, how important is that teamwork element, on a team that size? But to me, a really strong revenue operations leader, they drive so much cross-functional collaboration, because that's just how the business works. What does missing quota mean for a finance perspective? How are they working with FP&A? How are they working with operations? How are they working with the customer success and customer service team to really be able to provide a picture into the renewals and net retention rates? So to me, those two things are foundational. I think there's a lot of, I don't want to call them ancillary, but secondary things that, we want to see in a candidate. And a lot of those things we can help develop and help them, in their career, trajectory. But to me, without the business IQ and without the ability to really work collaboratively, I think you're going to have a very hard time, being successful in the role.
Yeah. David and I couldn't agree more. I mean, one of the things we talk about is really that business IQ, but then also the EQ side, right? Because like you said, so many times there's 1 to 3 players on this team, and most of your influence is up and out more than it is down to a team below you. So you're influencing the C-suite. You've got to be able to go in and have those conversations, be comfortable, know how to tell a story and not just give a data point. And then you've also got to be able to work so closely with all those other go-to-market leaders on the team. And if you can't build those relationships, if you can't have influence, if you can't bring change to an organization, the impact's going to be very, very small and very short-lived.
Yeah, the EQ is super important as well. And you think just about the nature of private equity backed companies, you do see a lot of turnover in sales teams. You do see turnover in C-suite. So to be able to navigate those relationships, understand, what these initiatives are, prioritize. 'Cause everyone has, for anyone who's operated in a revenue operations role, they have a list of too many priorities. And how do you really set forth, okay, this is what we're going to tackle in the next 3 months? And one thing that always, I would say came across and was a great piece of advice I received from a CRO I worked with years ago was having a very high say do ratio. If you say you're going to do it and do it to that level that we expect for you. Where I see a lot of revenue operations kind of fall off the path is you know, they may have that business IQ and they may have that collaborative initiative, but they take on too much. They
Yeah.
don't have that EQ to really say, like, hey, I need to push back and say, we're going to compromise these core things if we're trying to take on all of this. So yeah, I think that EQ is a really important component of it, and something that again is a key differentiator. And it's you guys do a great job in helping to identify and bring out those traits. But it's something, for someone who does a lot of hiring in the space, it is something often hard to, really hard to identify during the interview process.
I love that say-do ratio. I've never heard that before, but I'm going to steal that because, and it's not
Yeah.
in the sense, I mean, yeah, sure, there's some people that show up and decide, hey, I don't really want to do the work today, but that's not typically the issue. The issue is we're saying yes to too many things and we're not able to prioritize well. And so we don't execute the things that are most important because we've said yes to too many things. Either we don't have enough time or the things that we're working on aren't the right things to be working on. So I love that say-do ratio. I'm going to steal that.
Yeah, no, it's something I always kind of think about when, even in my role and getting to work with 30 plus revenue operations leader.
Yeah.
One of the first questions we always discuss is prioritization and bandwidth. And then what can we do very well? What's going to have the most impact? And also there's a sequential element, to these decisions when making, really what are we going to tackle? Like what needs to get done first? So whatever we're building next, is something we can really further, enhance, grow, develop. Like it's hard to build we're going to go implement Salesforce. We're going to revamp our Salesforce. But if you don't have the sales process, if you don't have the account hierarchy, if you don't have how you want to think about your ideal customer profile, you're not getting the full benefit of the CRM that you're investing thousands of dollars in.
So one thing I picked up on there is that the partnership, you mentioned all the other RevOps leaders that you're connecting with on a regular basis. And let's talk about that. What factors have you seen that contribute to a successful partnership between PE and value creation team and Portco? So you've got folks in the Portcos, right? You've got your team. How do you move the ball forward? How do you get everybody rowing in the right direction? Let's talk about that partnership.
Yeah, I think the key word there is the partnership.
Yeah.
And that has to start with knowing knowing that there is that level of partnership. So, whether it's a new revenue operations leader, an existing revenue operations leader, I'm always kind of extending my hand across the table, and letting them know that we are a resource and a partner for them. In my role, where I've been an operator, teams of one, that I've grown to teams, of a handful of people. And I think one of the things that we notice, that I noticed in the role, but also I see across the portfolio, is a lot of times they're recreating the wheel. And we have the templates, we have the insights, just that we have so many more reps at this that we can kind of guide them through the process. It's not saying we're doing it for them. We're not saying the way they were trying to tackle it is wrong. It's just saying, hey, as you think about this, here are some of the best practices. Here are some templates that kind of get you through it quicker. Here's someone to bounce ideas off of. And I think, again, going back to the partnership, the trust in the relationship, one thing that I think you'll hear from anybody that I've worked with over the years is, when you're in a pinch, I'll roll up my sleeves and kind of get in the weeds with you. And I think knowing that is a huge, it makes them feel like we are on the same team. And that's really what I would say that's a pillar to our philosophy at LLR. We're one family. I know you hear that probably all the time, but we really do look at our portfolio companies as, as partners, all as one big family. And um, I would say that's really, our approach to the partnership. And the second big component to it is consistency. So even if we're not, working on a project or going through an issue or a challenge, like I'm still checking in, I'm still asking them to check in. Like I'm putting out content that, I'm hopeful that they can, find as value add. And it's not always about, maybe an initiative that I have or the, LLR has, for the portfolio company, but it's also on, for them, around their development, around their skill set. So how do you take someone who's a Salesforce administrator and make them, more into a revenue operations role? How do you get someone who's in a analyst role and get them into that director or manager level role? So we're trying to provide those level of insights that also, like they see the value in, working across the table and, and being a partner to us as well.
Yeah, I mean, what a valuable resource to be able to. I'm thinking if I'm the RevOps leader in a portfolio company, and I'm trying to figure it all out, right? There's something new that I've got to accomplish to be able to go back to a team that like Drew, who's connected to all these others who have seen that, and be able to say, hey, here's where the potholes are. Here, we tried this, it didn't work, but we did find that this was successful. That's such a huge resource. And honestly, Drew, from talking with lots of different PE firms, not everybody does it the same way. And it's super encouraging to know that that's how LLR approaches it, and just how they support the teams internally, connected back to the value creation.
Even when I was in the operator role, I'd say what kind of brought me back into kind of more of the value creation team role was, my partner on the value creation team, we both kind of made the move to go and be value creation team members together. And I learned so much from him over the years that we got to work together. And he saw how I operate, and he, that kind of that partnership. And, like, I'll give a little hat tip to Matt Gallagher. He's in my mind, one of the greatest, you know, sales value creation team specialists out there. And that he kind of guided me into like, hey, these are some of the things that work really well. And I try to teach that, I try to kind of pay that forward of, like, here's how we're thinking about this, not kind of giving the answers, but just the process to go from point A to point B, and always understanding like, why are we doing this? I think where I see the difference in these partnerships is when someone says, hey, go do this, and it just becomes a request. First, hey, we're doing this because we're trying to execute A, B, and C. But this is the why, and these are the things we need to watch out for, and really kind of guiding them through that process. And I think that's a big differentiator. And for anybody listening, like if you're in an operating role and you have a value creation team counterpart, I would push them to teach you and to be that resource. And if you are in a value creation team role, I'd say, hey, go take that extra, that extra step, and take that extra phone call, and really be that partner, and kind of teach and educate. And I think it's part of the reason why you're just seeing such a growth in the talent of RevOps is across the market. Is there's a lot of people out there who are willing to work with each other, and it's a great network of professionals.
I think another interesting part, and it kind of riffs off of everything we're talking about here, is this, when we're placing talent into a portco, we're placing a RevOps leader generally in the lower middle market. It's, it's one person, right? We're looking for a strategist and a tactician. We're looking for that balance. And, Drew, we've worked together on this. We've had many conversations around this topic. But I think this is so critical, the value creation team counterpart, that when you're coming in and you're making that hire, a lot of times candidates will ask us, well, what does the support network look like, right, for me when I come in? And, a lot of times we can't say you're going to get a team of 2 by month 3, right? Or you're going to get another resource. Maybe it's a vendor on the list for some really heavy lifts on the technical side of Salesforce, right? That's about it. But you're having to be hands-on. You're having to drive both strategy. You're having to be hands-on tactical. But being able to say, there's a great resource for you. There's support for you on the PE side with value creation. There's RevOps folks that they have your back, right? It's super valuable to be able to say that. It's helped our process too.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it makes a material impact, and you know this, and I always try to get involved in the interview process. Not even as more of a vetting, of talent, but just to kind of create what this landscape looks like, and to answer questions and to be a resource and to say, like, I know what works, I know what typically doesn't work. Uh, and for anyone to make the career move or to switch switch positions, it's a big decision, and we want them to be fully educated in what the expectations are. I think we haven't talked about that, but there are high expectations for the revenue operations leaders of
Yeah.
private equity backed companies, um, and nobody wants to see it not work out in the way that ultimately leads to termination. So we want to make sure people are aware of the situation that they're getting into. And I think for the right candidate, like, there's just so much potential. There's so much growth. And I don't know how many interviews I've done where, you've coordinated them, David and team, where, sometimes I feel like I'm selling the role, or selling the partnership just because that's how, I guess how optimistic or how, how much value I see in the partnership. It's not intentional. It's just, like, I get to work every day with, you know, 20, 30 different people, that I'm learning from just as much. So I like to kind of bring that out in the interviews. And again, for anyone going through the process of, interviewing, for a RevOps role, and you're talking to the private equity firm, ask those questions of what that partnership looks like. Have it's someone that you're going to be working very closely with. So I think it's so important to have that connection, have that transparency, and it's something that I rather address early in the process than 6 months into the role. One other thing I would add there is just a lot of these companies that we're interviewing for, or we're involved in the interview process, it's their first time having a revenue operations function. I know we talked about this a bunch. Like, that's a hard thing to interview for when you've never had this role before. You don't know what success looks like, um, and I think it makes for a unique interviewing process just because there's a little bit of uncertainty. Like,
Hmm.
I don't know what I'm walking into, and those are, I think, a lot of things that we try to address, during the process. But again, I've been in that situation on the other side of the table as well. It does make for sometimes an interesting process.
Yeah, and honestly, that's a great point for if you're in the C-suite or you're in that, leadership, go-to-market leadership, and making that first hire. If you have a team and you're not already utilizing them on the PE side, get them involved in that hiring process too. Because if you've never hired that role, you want to make sure you get the right person and get them in there, the right person in there initially. So yeah, that's a great tip there.
Yeah, not to give you guys a sales pitch, but again, I think it's why we see so much value in the role you bring. Because for somebody who hasn't had that role, to hold their hand through this process, hey, these are the things we should be looking for. Here's a way that we can evaluate their skill set. Here are the ways we can evaluate their IQ and EQ, and the screening that you guys do. That all that adds value, and it's something for a lot of us, in the portfolio, in the PE space, the value creation teams. We work very wide. So a lot of, like, the bandwidth to kind of hold the hand through that process. We can do it, for portions, but at some point, we can't be there at every step. And that's where, having good partners, in this type of scenario, but we're just kind of across the board, it makes it so important.
Yeah.
Well, this has been an incredible conversation, Drew. I feel like we've got tons of insights. So thank you so much. First of all, thank you for being on our podcast. And, for folks out there, if you want to connect with Drew and want to have more conversations, we talked a lot about the collaboration, right? Learning from each other. So if there are operators out there, take a look at Drew, see what he's doing. He's got tons of insight, tons of experience. Reach out to him, connect with him. And Drew, we're thankful for you and the friendship and the partnership as well.
I appreciate you guys do great work, and it's been great to be on the call today.
Drew, great to have you. Thanks for being on the show, and look forward to connecting again soon.
Awesome, guys. Have a great one.
Thanks.
Yep.
See ya.